I've been a garbage man for 15 years. I've seen some strange things. Part 2. Written by Superbrooke. I've been checking my previous post a few times since I've submitted it, and honestly, I'm surprised at the feedback I've received. First off, I want to clarify a few things about my job. If it wasn't clear in the first post, we pick up trash once a week in our city. If I gave you any impression that we picked up trash every day, I apologize, because that most certainly isn't the case. A few of you have mentioned family members who are also garbage men. I'm sure that they have had their fair share of strange experiences, and I would love to hear more about those to see if there are any similarities to my own. Another thing, someone mentioned Islamic mythology and trash being associated with the jinn. I'd love a little more information on this. As someone who has only worked for a small city in my adult years, I'm not particularly well versed in mythological creatures. Anyways, on to some more stories. I haven't always worked with Tom on the garbage truck. At first, I worked in the main office and cleaned out garbage cans and hauled certain materials to recycling centers. I got off work a couple of hours earlier when I was in the office, but I had been requesting trash pickup for a while. I needed something a little less boring if I was going to stick around. Eventually, I got the call about switching departments, and I was set to start trash pickup the following day. They paired me with some guy named Cal, and honestly, that should have been my first sign. Cal was unlike any guy you've ever met. He was always smiling. Always. No matter what was going on. The world could be ending right in front of his face, and he'd still be smiling. And this wasn't just any kind of smile. It was a big smile, so big in fact that it seemed unnatural. His teeth were perfect, straight and shiny and pure white. He had slicked back blonde hair too, like he used too much gel in the morning. He almost reminded me of a Ken doll. Something about the way he moved, though, set me on edge. Anytime he got out of the truck to help me load something big, his movements were deliberate. He was always tense, like his joints needed some WD-40 to loosen them up. He never bent his knees when he walked and instead waddled like a penguin. I always just brushed it off as some kind of defect that Kel had. But later on, I realized that that wasn't the case. One day, when we had just started our shift and it was around 7 in the morning, before we had pulled into our first house, Kel slammed on the brakes and almost sent me flying off the back of the truck. "What the?" I said, trying to balance myself with the handrail. I hopped down from the small platform on the corner of the truck, ready to give Kel hell for almost bucking me off the truck. He could have been swerving to avoid hitting an animal, but with me hanging off the back of the truck, he should have been more careful. "Kel, you piece of..." I stopped talking abruptly when I made it to the driver's side door, my mouth hanging open in awe. Kel was sitting in the driver's seat, staring out the front windshield, his head slightly tilted to the right. He had a wide grin plastered on his blemish-free face. I didn't say anything and instead peered over the front of the truck. I didn't see any animals or rocks or tree limbs that he was trying to avoid. So, why had he stopped in the middle of the road so suddenly? "Hey, Cal," I snapped my fingers in his ears, trying to get his attention, to no avail. He stayed in the same position, grin and all. Honestly, the longer I stared at him, the more I started to get creeped out. Was he in some sort of catatonic trance, I wondered. "Dude, we really need to get going," I said, trying once again to get his attention. No response. Instead, I saw a small pillow of smoke start to seep from his ear. It was almost like those cartoons you see where the characters get angry and smoke starts to billow out from their ears. Except this was seeping out slowly like an early morning fog. Worried, I reached into the truck and poked Kel's shoulder. I regretted that decision as soon as it was made, though, because he started shaking violently once I touched him. The smoke started pouring out of his ears thick and fast like his insides were on fire. I stared at him with wide eyes, unsure of what to do. The longer he shook, the more worried I became, so I pulled out my cell phone and dialed the city's office. "Billing Sanitation Services, this is Martha. How can I help you?" At first, I didn't know what to say. Because how was anyone going to believe that my coworker was smoking from the ears and having some sort of violent seizure? I had no other choice, so I just started rambling like a madman, telling Martha what was going on with Kel. She assured me that things were fine, but she dispatched the lead office to check on us. Within minutes, they arrived and had pulled Kel out of the truck before I was able to ask any questions. They carried Kel off like a baby hanging off its mother's shoulder. He was limp and lifeless now. The shaking and smoking had stopped, thankfully. As I watched them leave, Kel lifted his head to give me the most evil glare that you could imagine. He tilted his head to the side, but at a strange angle, like it was almost upside down. I didn't know how the position wasn't hurting him. As the crew carried him away, he lifted an arm slowly and pointed a finger straight at me. I saw him mouth the word, "you," as they loaded him into the truck. He kept his eyes on me the entire time. I never saw Kel again, and I never knew what happened to him. I was always too afraid to ask. The next day, they paired me with Tom, and I continued work like nothing had happened. When I think about the look that he gave me, though, a shiver vibrates through my body. I don't know what he meant by it or the deliberate pointing, but something tells me that it was malicious. The next story is more weird than it is anything else, but I figure that it's interesting enough to tell. There is this man who always waits for us at the curb when we pick up his trash. He usually has 2 bags of trash, but sometimes it's 3. I guess it depends on the week. But instead of leaving the bags on the curb for us to pick up, he always hands me the bags himself. It's kind of like he wants to make sure that we don't forget to stop at his house and collect his trash, even though we have the whole route mapped out perfectly now. He always thanks us for our service and gives Tom and me a piece of hard candy in a cherry red wrapper. I'm not sure what kind of candy it is because I never eat it. Hard candy hurts my teeth, and I don't like the fact of eating something from someone that I barely know. So, when we drive out of sight, I usually toss my candy into the back of the truck. I'm not sure what Tom does with his, though. Part of me wants to believe that the man has good intentions, but there's something about the guy that rubs me the wrong way. Anyway, one day we get to his house and he isn't standing at the curb. There are 2 bags of trash sitting in his place, though, and the front door of the man's house is standing wide open. I guess that Tom noticed how strange the scene seemed because he got out of the truck, and we both gave each other our "something is up" look. I didn't touch the trash bags while Tom called the police. We stood there until an officer arrived and went into the house. He was only in there for a few minutes before he came back out and phoned for backup and an ambulance. Tom and I stuck around for a few more minutes while the officer peeked into one of the trash bags. It was full of those familiar red candy wrappers, all empty. Tom and I gave each other another look, and we left shortly after that. A few days later, I heard what happened on the news. The police had found the guy lying in his living room, dead. An autopsy report showed that he had suffocated. They didn't reveal if he had choked on something or if someone had choked him. But they did reveal that he was completely surrounded by those cherry candy wrappers. Now, a lot of you seemed concerned about the sludge boy in my last post. To be honest, I see so many strange things day to day that I had almost forgotten about him. That is, until I saw him again. This past Saturday, I was at my local coffee shop getting a donut and decaf coffee. Caffeine makes my heart flutter, to try and decompress after a long work week. I sat down at one of the tables facing the window overlooking the street when I noticed something strange going on outside. A kid, more likely a teenager, was doing some sort of ballerina dance across the street. He had short, greasy black hair that stuck to his forehead. But what was so strange about the boy was that he wore jeans that looked 2 sizes too big for him and a t-shirt that had been cut off to show his midriff. The cuts were jagged and uneven, like a toddler had been the one to crop the shirt. It took a second, but I noticed that it was the same boy who had popped out from the ball of sludge in the landfill. At least he had clothes on this time, but something was still off about him. As people walked past him on the street, he continued to dance on his tiptoes like a ballerina performing for hundreds on a stage. He twirled around with his arms in the air and jumped and pranced from side to side. He sure was putting on quite the show, but the people around him didn't seem to notice. In fact, I seemed to be the only one who was watching. Something about the whole scene left a bad taste in my mouth, and I couldn't even eat my donut. I continued watching the boy, wondering if I should go outside and take him to a doctor or a hospital or something. But as I contemplated the idea, he stopped. He stopped mid-twirl like someone had pressed the pause button on a remote that was controlling his movements. He turned his head slowly and we made eye contact. His lips turned down into an animated frown like he was sad no one was watching his dance. We each stared at each other for a solid minute until he broke from his stance and stood stick straight. His frown was gone. His mouth was now a sharp, straight line across his face. Something told me I needed to get up and run, but I was frozen in place. I needed to see what was going to happen. Much like the first time we met, he started backing away slowly, moving in painful, twisty jerks. This time, he cupped his hands around his mouth and let out the most blood-curdling screech I have ever heard. "It's coming!" he screamed again, a repeat of what he had growled the first time. No one else seemed to notice what was going on. They were all stuck in their own little worlds. Instead of waiting around to see if whatever was coming showed up, I hightailed it out of the coffee shop and I went back home. I still had no idea what was coming or what the boy meant by it. But what I did know was that I had a terrible feeling that something bad was about to happen.